Okay, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for being here for our private housing student affairs expat panel. We have a wonderful panel here ready to talk about their experience making this transition from university housing to private housing. And we are currently missing one of our panelists, but we're going to go ahead and leave Erin Soto up here. Hopefully she'll be able to join us, but she might have been called into something that she wasn't able to excuse herself from, which we totally understand, especially in that private housing area, right? So I wanted to just give a little bit of logistical things for those of you, maybe this is the first panel you've joined. Right now on your screen, you should have a slide that includes a bit.ly link. Bit.ly is case sensitive, so keep that in mind. But if you follow that link, you're going to find a folder that has a Google Doc for every single presentation that we have this week, and next week's will be added over the weekend. And on that document for each panel, you will find the contact information and some resources shared by our fantastic panelists. So make sure that you check that out. Our panelists have been amazing and willing to share that information if you have follow-up questions. Our chat today is, everyone is muted except for our panelists, but if you have questions, the chat is open. So please feel free to add your questions at any time and I'll be able to fold those into the questions that I ask our panelists. You're also able to submit questions anonymously and somewhat anonymously if you'd like. So you've got two options for doing that. One is to rename yourself in Zoom. In Zoom, you have the ability to change what your name is. You can change it to whatever you'd like, and that way you can ask your questions without folks knowing what your identity is. The other option you have is to send me a private message, and I will see your identity based on your Zoom name, so just keep that in mind, but I'm happy to ask your questions to our panelists without revealing who asked that question. So you have that option as well. And then if you would prefer to ask a question using the microphone, just either send me a message directly or use the little hand raise icon on Zoom and I'll be able to unmute you so that you can ask that question directly as well. Another thing that I want to make sure and acknowledge today that's not logistic at all is very important is that we are celebrating Juneteenth Day today. So thank you all for being here on this incredibly important day in our history. And I wanted to share a resource from an organization that I have no connection with, but I found this resource on LinkedIn, and it provides different learning channels for folks to learn more about what Juneteenth means in our history, as well as other critical issues related to racial injustice and Black Lives Matter. So again, no connection with this organization. It is created for their employees, but they made it public so that the resources are available for all. So hopefully some of you will be able to join me in learning that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with having our panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Franklin. I work as the Director of Operations for Capstone On-Campus Management, or COCM. I do not work on campus though. I work in an off-campus housing apartment complex. Was that all you need?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, and then what's your background in, I didn't give you the actual question.
Right.
What's your background in student affairs and higher education?
Yes, so I worked for 12 years in housing and residence life before moving into this role.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Teresa Crum. I am currently the Senior Vice President of Operations for Servitas. My background is in residence life and the higher ed side, and I'll be honest, I only spent 2 years in grad school and then 2 years post-masters before starting to transition into P3 roles.
Great, thank you both so much. So I want to really dig into your current roles. So for the first question, would you tell us what specifically your role includes currently, and then speak a little bit about the transferable skills that came, and I'm sure in this topic specifically, there's so many transferable skills. So if you could just talk about what you're bringing from your higher ed background into your current role. And Teresa, we'll let you speak first this time.
Okay, so in my current role, I've moved up in the ranks. So what I do today is very different than what I did when I started. So in my current role, I supervise multiple sites across our portfolio. In fact, all of our third-party P3 management projects report to me. We're a smaller company, so currently all of the site level managers, which can be called lots of different things. They can be called a director of operations, they can be called a community manager, they can be called a community director. There's lots of different titles that you'll see. And so those folks report directly to me because of the size. And so I do a lot of day-to-day interaction with those teams about how things are happening at their sites. Everything from leasing to residence life programming, how's the community experience, to how are things going with the partnerships with the institutions that we're partnering with. Lots of conversations with DPSAs, Director of Housing, and I spend a lot of time just sort of being at that table and having conversations to make sure that the partnership is flowing the way it needs to flow.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So this situation, Teresa would be like my boss, because that's the role my boss has. So I do the day-to-day operations of a community. It's a student housing, but off campus. So it's like a private residence hall, but it's not affiliated with the university. So I do manage all of the maintenance, all the capital planning, leasing, budgeting. I don't do it all myself. I have a staff, but I oversee kind of everything that has to do with management of the building and making sure we meet all of our occupancy goals and that we're keeping the building in best condition that we can. So while we are located near a university, one of our challenges, we are not the university. So it's also marketing and making sure that the community knows we're there. Staying up on all legal matters. That's been really important right now because of everything that's changing due to COVID. So that's kind of all of my day-to-day, encompassing all that, plus all the HR functions fall under me too.
Perfect, thank you. So, and I guess I do want to make sure that both our attendees and our panelists know I'm a bit of an anomaly in higher ed student affairs. I have never lived on, even as a student. So please, if I am missing questions that really need to be asked, you know, attendees, panelists, make sure that I want this to be useful for you all, and I'm not sure that I have all of the appropriate questions to ask there. But one question I do want to make sure that we address is, what about the first year making the transition from higher ed student affairs to private housing? Talk about that transition a little bit. Were there any gaps that you had? And if so, how did you address those gaps? And so Kristen, we'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, I think the biggest gap I found was the legal side. Under the university umbrella, you have kind of that educational deference situation where the university can kind of do what it wants in most cases. And so I had to really dig into what our local and state leasing laws were and rental laws to make sure that we weren't doing anything that would violate Fair Housing Act, that would violate local ordinances, state ordinances, and those are constantly changing. So also like getting to know our lawyer for the site so that she would know to email me and send me updates when she found out about things that were changing. So that would be that I considered the biggest gap in my knowledge. I think there are a lot of things that you just don't get as much experience with unless you've been a director before of just like budgeting. I am responsible, like they handed me a budget and said, fill this out. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can manage like $7 million, no problem. So kind of learning those things along the way to figure all of that out. But a lot of the things are the same. Like if you use a housing database, we use a housing database. Like it's a little different, but it's essentially the same thing. If you've done maintenance work or planned maintenance work, the planning of the maintenance work, again, is stuff that in housing we do a lot of these things, maybe on a smaller scale because you're not as in depth with it, but those are all things we do. I also think one of the changes is like we have to pay all the bills, whereas normally that would get sent to a different office to do. So making sure your accounts payable and accounts receivable are all set up and being managed and you're not getting late fees and things like that. So luckily I have staff that was already in their positions and they could help me along the way with a lot of those things. But some of the time it was trial by error. And sometimes I had to call my boss and she would walk me through it too.
That's great.
I would say it's going to vary depending on what level you're coming in at. So I did not have a ton of professional experience when I came over to this side. Having only been 2 years postmasters, I came in at what we would call like an assistant community manager level. I went to a site where it was a P3 on campus. So that also looks very different about gaps and things that you might be missing. So I went into a P3 that was an on campus. I was in an assistant community manager role, and I was responsible for all of residence life. So I didn't have very many gaps at all, because an assistant director of residence life at that campus, I managed 30 RAs, which is, you know, a fairly small program, and kind of hit on all cylinders. So as far as my position, my current position, for me, that there was not a lot of gaps. However, that next level, which is what Kristen's level would be, tons of gaps. So maintenance experience, overseeing capital improvement projects, long range capital planning, because I came in so green, I didn't have a ton of capital planning experience. My maintenance experience was the extent of doing maintenance walkthroughs and putting in maintenance requests and following up to make sure maintenance work orders were being followed through. So doing some of that long range planning and preventative maintenance, or PM, I think those things were skills that I really lacked in. And I'll be honest, I sat in Kristen's type of role for a really long time. So I was in the assistant manager role for about less than a year, but at the community manager level or that director level, I sat in that role for about 7 years. And I'll be honest, it took about a good year for me to feel like I had my feet under me. From a budgeting experience, creating one, setting rates. So there's a lot of those things in the legal stuff, because there are some things that a school can do that even when you're in a public-private partnership, that's what P3 is. I saw that question come up. So when you're in that role, there are things that the university can do that sometimes you can tag onto that because you're in that partnership, and sometimes you can't. And so understanding the legal implications of decisions that the university is making and how to help make sure that we're staying compliant and we're maintaining a good partnership, but also being legal so that we're not doing anything we shouldn't be doing. So I do echo a lot of those same things that Kristen said. You really do, in that community manager role, you're basically like a director of housing for a small housing program, because it's accounts payable, accounts receivable, it's budgeting, it's setting rates, it's capital planning, it's all the maintenance. So it really is kind of that experience. And so if you are coming over from a director level, probably not going to have a ton of gaps in your experience. Maybe from a legal standpoint, you might have some that you need to work through. But if you come over at a different level or less professional experience, you're going to see and feel those gaps a little bit more.
And also for anyone who hasn't worked, just in case we're talking a weird language. So there's a lot of universities who for some reason or another cannot afford to build their own housing or improve their housing the way they want. What they'll do is hire a private company to come in and pay for those types of things. And then the company is managed by a private management company. And a lot of times you'll see our companies, we work with the same people quite a bit. So this is kind of to jump ahead, but one trend that we're starting to see is there are universities actually looking to turn their entire portfolio over to a private company because it's getting too expensive for them to do the upgrades they need to do. With COVID, they're not able to do the rehab to the buildings to make the private bathrooms, and that's something that public-private partnerships generally have, are more private bathroom, private bedroom situations. So it's a good transition between going fully away from higher education, but you kind of still have one foot because you have those partnerships with the higher education, but there's a lot less politics. There's a lot less of the having to deal with the hierarchy of a university because you're working with your one building, and then kind of how that fits into the bigger plans of the university.
And I will say, and if I'm jumping ahead, Jeannie, let us know, but the cool thing about transitioning into private housing is there are lots of options.
Mm-hmm.
I have some higher ed friends that have gone into the consulting roles, and those consultants a lot of times will help schools work through details of, do they privatize, do they not privatize, you know, what's the status of their master plan. They work through all those details.
Yep.
Erin, who's not on the call today, she does probably off-campus management. I'm guessing CA Ventures does a lot of off-campus student housing management. So she is running a property that's off-campus and competing in that off-campus market. And so there are those opportunities. All of us have chosen the student housing realm, probably each of us for different reasons. I know my reason was that I still need to feel that connection. For me personally, I enjoy the student interaction and I enjoy the student development piece that I still get to do. I have friends that have opted to go the multifamily route. And so that's another option. If you've got, particularly if you have some student housing skills that you can use, maybe your market doesn't have a ton of student housing, you could potentially look at multifamily housing, or there are companies out there that manage HOAs. There are companies out there that manage single family homes, and you have a skill set that you can bring to the table if you are desiring to get completely away from the student experience.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. So I'm curious, is there a part of your roles that is your favorite that would not necessarily be something that you get to experience in a campus-based position or directly with the institution? So usually this question when I ask these panels is what's your favorite part and what's your least favorite? But I wonder how different that would be if you were in res life on a university. Is there anything that's like favorite that you only get because of your being in private housing, and like a least favorite that you only get because you're in private housing? Does that make sense?
Let's see. I think for me, probably my most favorite that I get because of the role that I currently have is that I'm not tied to one campus. So I get to see how lots of different campuses are doing things across the country. In previous roles that I've held, I also was responsible for some off-campus properties. So it was fun for me to learn what that experience is like off campus for students that I would not have gotten in a traditional type experience. So I think that that's probably one of those things that if I were in a traditional experience, I would miss out on, and I really like doing those things.
That's great. Is there anything that as being in like that you have to deal with now that you didn't that you're not so thrilled about?
Yeah, I would say multiple ownership groups. Some are better than others, and they can be a challenge. Now, would you get that at a university? Absolutely. You're going to love some administrators versus others. But when they're ownership groups, obviously they're very tied to what's happening in the success at a particular project. And so sometimes that can be challenging. Particularly when you see things from a student affairs perspective that you think you could make some positive impact for the student experience, and they really don't want to hear it. So that's probably my least favorite part.
Kristen, how about you?
I think my favorite part is like I can go to my staff or they can come to me and be like, we have this brilliant idea. And instead of 6 months later, going into fruition the next day we can start, I can just shoot an email off to, the important parties that need to know if it's a big change or if it's a little change, we can just kind of start running with it. Yesterday we're currently in a little bit of a leasing crunch. Thank you, COVID. And so it was like, we came up with some ideas on ways we could increase revenue. And, I sent an email, I got an email back the same day, and now we've already sold the space that we used to use as a model. So it's like little things like that, that would have taken a long time in my old world. And 24 hours later, I've, already have all steps completed for it. So I am in off-campus and multifamily housing too. And I also really like working with people who are and aren't students and kind of getting that good mix of both and seeing sometimes how that changes the perspective of even the students and other people because they're interacting with different people than are just in the community. I do miss from being on campus. So I guess maybe the worst part of it for me is being able to walk across campus and like have those relationships with people outside my department. But on the other side, I have people all over the country who are in similar roles to me who can, they're not here, so they can kind of give me different ideas and different feedback. So I honestly, there's not much I miss about being on campus. I really like my job, and I really like the freedoms it gives me. I like that I can give my staff different freedoms and kind of control that environment. And it's not always like, well, HR says you can't do that, because HR is in Alabama, and, there are two people. So I'm managing a lot of that day to day of, okay, you need to take an hour off. You need to, kind of working with people that way. So I really love my transition. And I don't know that I'll ever go back to a campus as much as my spouse wants me to. So our children get free tuition. I don't think I can bring myself, like, some things are not worth free tuition. So I think that's kind of where I am with it.
That's great. Thank you. I want to shift now to talking about some actual, resources for folks who want to make this transition. So could you tell me a little bit about what your transition was in terms of how did you find these positions? Did you need to do anything specific to your resume to make it more palatable for the off-campus private housing? What was the search process like? We're used to in higher ed doing presentations and meeting with different search committees and all of this. What did that look like? And then, and I know these are a lot of questions, but just kind of a big picture what the search was. And I think, Kristen, if you want to start us off this time.
Sure. For me, I always look at like Indeed. I know our site, we do still post on higheredjobs.com because it is with the P3 partnership. But if you're looking for something that's maybe more multifamily, Indeed's generally, for me, I found to be a better option that way. And so those are the two places I looked. With any job I've ever looked for that's not university, one of the big things I do is try to take anything off my resume that's, I look through what the job description is, and then I look at how my job lines up with that and the things that I've done. And that's what I did to my resume, was kind of align it with, okay, here's what they're looking for. Here's an experience I have that kind of matches that. And how can I frame that in a way that shows that that's a transferable skill? I think it's a lot easier in these positions, especially if you're going into the student housing market, whether it's on or off campus student housing, because they are looking for a lot of the skills we already have. I think if you're going to like a retail property management or a full on like single family home, you're going to want to adjust your resume a little more. Because, maybe instead of event planning, or instead of planning like the homecoming committee or whatever, you can say planned a large scale event, had so many attendees, something like that, to kind of make what you did a little more generic so that it fits into what they're looking for. I think the job search process, it went really fast. I think that's the biggest difference between higher ed and non-higher ed. So I was actually in a process for an off-campus and an on-campus job at the same time. And the reason, I was leaning towards this one anyways, but the reason I ended up with it was because they moved so fast. So like I had a phone interview one day, they brought me to campus, or the site, not the campus, the next week. And they'd offered me the job by the end of that week. And so it was so fast. And that was really nice for me to see, because, in higher ed land, sometimes you're floating out there 6 months later and you still even haven't heard from someone whether or not you got the job. And turns out they hired someone and you're like, well, thanks for letting me know. So that was really nice.
I echo a ton of what Kristen has said. Job process will move faster, hiring, all that stuff. I think it will depend on what kind of position you're applying for, what tweaks you might need to take to your resume. As a hiring manager, I don't care as much about, do you have a property management certificate? Do you have your CAM or your CPM or any of that kind of stuff? Cool if you have it, that's an added bonus, but it's not going to keep you from getting an interview, and your interview is your opportunity to shine. So I think that that's really important for you to know. Network. I cannot stress networking enough. Like, I got my first role through networking. Basically, the person that hired me was the best friend of my grad student advisor. So that's how I got that job. And I will tell you that I have recruited a ton of people to this side, and they are either at the company that I was at previously, or they're at other companies now because they've moved up and moved on. So that networking and utilizing those, I think are hugely, I can't stress that enough. LinkedIn is super important. But like I said, networking and getting to know, because you never know who's making the transition. Like for example, my grad school advisor, when I left to go take my first full-time job, he was still an assistant director of housing and residence life. A year later, he transitioned into a community manager role with a private company. And so when I was looking a year after that, he was like, oh, I have this great opportunity. So like, you never know when somebody is going to make the jump. And so keeping up those those relationships that you have, I think are hugely important as you think about your long-term career plan.
To echo and follow up on this, I think if you're on a campus that has a P3, go introduce yourself, ask how you can help the company, or even if you know there's one local to another university, be like, hey, this is something I'm really interested in. Because a lot of times, like I know our company has a referral program that if I tell you to apply for a job and you apply and get hired, I get a bonus. So it's better for me if you come in and talk to me too, because then we both kind of win in that situation. So, you know, don't be scared to reach out to some places near you and be like, hey, can I come in? Can I talk to you about the position? Can I talk to you about that? Is your regional or, you know, someone in Teresa's position coming in soon? Is there any chance I could chat with them about like what they look for in the hiring process? And I think, you know, I think you'll find that most people are really willing to talk about their experiences and talk about how they got into the field, because a lot of us come from that place that y'all are in right now of like, I'm so fed up with this and I know it can be better. And so knowing that we've had those experiences, it's not like you're going to come up against a wall of people who are like, oh no, we don't want you in our field. Like you're going to get a ton of people being like, yes, look at the jobs, see what you're interested in, apply for the jobs. You're the type of people we're looking for. So, you know, if you take that first step, I know if somebody reached out to me, I've had people within and outside of our company reach out to ask questions. And I'm always like, yes, let's talk. Let's, you know, let's get you in here. Let's tell you when things are available. Because you're the people we want.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I want to go to a question that came in through the chat. Are these jobs remote, on-site, both? I know, and of course we're talking about non-COVID times. I know I had recently posted a job that I had just seen in our expats group, and I'm not sure who responded actually. Someone responded and said that, you know, this is kind of a road warrior position. So how many of those positions are these types of road warrior where you're doing a lot of travel? If you guys could just talk a little bit about what kind of these positions look like, that'd be great. And Teresa, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, if you are on a site level position, you're there. So folks in that community manager, property manager role, or even the assistant manager role, you're at a site, minimal travel type situation. The next level up is typically a regional, unless you work for a small company like me. It's typically a regional, and I did spend several years in that type of a role. That is one of those road warrior type roles. You're expected to travel to your sites for quarterly meetings, making sure everybody's got everything they need, and just kind of general check-in type stuff. You might be covering while somebody is out on vacation or whatever it happens to be. So that kind of next level tends to be a road warrior. I did see that posting. It was, I think maybe it was either a training and development position, or it might've been like a leasing and marketing type position. I will tell you, those people pretty much live on the road. So whereas a regional, you might have an office either in the corporate office or from your home, which can be remote, which is super great. When I was a regional director, my home base was my house. So when I wasn't traveling, I was working remote at my home. But a lot of times those folks that are in these kind of regional sales and marketing roles, they literally are on the road 90% of the time. So you just got to know that while that, yes, that's an offsite position, or yes, that's a remote position, it comes with a lot of travel. And some people are cut out for that, and some people aren't. And it's a position that tends to burn out quite a bit because of the travel. So you just need to know that kind of going into it on the front end. Ask lots of questions about what expectations are for travel, time off, being in the office, particularly for those road warrior type positions.
Teresa, could I just add something about the Road Warrior? I'm in the field of international education, so we have a ton of Road Warrior positions because folks are going to like study abroad fairs and things like that. And same thing, you have to be cut out for it. There's high burnout. But one thing that is nice is that on all of that travel, you're making connections at so many different locations. So if you have it in you for a short amount of time, it could be a really good way to network and grow your network and be able to move on to what's next.
Absolutely. And like you said, because you're meeting, so you never know where your next job opportunity is. I found when I was traveling, one of the things we would do is go visit our competition, our comps. We all tend to be fairly friendly and go take tours of what's happening in the market. And you meet a lot of people that way. And you can call somebody and say, hey, I've got this great job opportunity, or they may call you and say, hey, I've got this great job opportunity, just because you've met a couple of times through those Road Warrior experiences. So definitely use those to your advantage.
Everything Teresa just said, but remote work is pretty limited in this field just because you are at a site and you are responsible for that site. So like, they're still going to be on call in the evening but you'll have a rotation, but you're still going to have on call. And depending how your building is set up, that can be really different. I have someone on my staff who used to work for a multifamily apartment complex that did not have anyone who worked on site. And she said she would get calls 24/7. Like she never had a break. Now at our site, we still have a student staff style position. So they take my overnight calls. I don't get those that often. But it is something that you do need to take account is I think with COVID, we're going to have some changes where like our staff is rotating. Even after this is all done, we'll keep rotating because I think for some people working from home helps them to be really productive. So we've learned that and we can kind of fold that into it. But the majority of time you are going to find that you need to be in the office, be present, have your face seen, because just like in on-campus housing where you want to retain your students from year to year and not have them move off campus, it is a lot easier for you if you can retain your residents year to year, and them seeing your face and seeing you care is the way that you do that.
Yeah, that's really great. That's helpful. You said something. Well, actually, no, that's what it was. I wanted to learn a little bit more about that on-call experience. If you could talk a little bit more about how because I know a lot of folks are looking to get out of res life because of that duty phone. So what does an on-call experience look like? And maybe if you could speak to the different levels to what it looks like for the different levels in private housing. Kristen, do you want to start us off?
I saw there was a question. Do you want me to also touch on the hierarchy of
Sure, if you'd like, if that's a natural fit, yeah.
So I think it's going to depend on what site you're at and what your site is like. There are sites in our portfolio where there are 1 or 2 people working those sites because they're very small or they're startups and they haven't had a lot of people hired yet. There are sites that are very, very large that have 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 staff, and they're going to have a much different on-call hierarchy experience. But we, in the field of property management, you're going to have everything from your junior tradespeople, so your maintenance technicians, your hourly employees, your office coordinators, office staff, things like that. We have our positions kind of follow along with a higher ed flow at my site, but we call them assistant directors. I have someone who's operations, and that's like our accounts payable, our day-to-day, they manage our keys, they do a lot of our occupancy style stuff and just making sure the day-to-day stuff is going. I have a facilities director who manages, make sure all our preventative maintenance happens, make sure the building continues to function and anything that's broken gets fixed. And then I have an assistant director for leasing and marketing, and that person does all of our sales, getting their faces, she's set up all the virtual tours now and she's talking and trying to get heads into our beds. And then there's me as the director who oversees all of that. For us, we have 3 chains of command for on-call. So we have our community assistants who are students at the local university who get a free apartment by doing this position, and they take those general calls. A lot of what they handle is my toilet's clogged, my breaker, needs to be flipped. It's pretty minimal stuff. And then we have every day a maintenance staff on call, and I have 3 maintenance staff, so they rotate. For them, they choose to do it week by week, so each week they're on. Again, pretty minimal calls because we have that first line that comes into it. And then on our side, we have a professional staff on call, and there's 3 of us who do that. I I'm always on call as the director. If like something really serious happens, I will tell you in 2 years, I've gotten 2 calls. So it's been pretty, and that's from just the director level that I wasn't on call and they called me for something outside of that. When I'm regularly on call, I maybe get 1 or 2 calls a week, and they're usually because we make them come through us for a facilities call. We don't want our student staff making that call if we need to pay for overtime for maintenance or not. So they call me and I decide what they need to do. I also do have 1 staff member who lives on site. And normally if there is something that needs to be addressed by a professional staff member on site, even if he's not on call, he's always like, call me first because I'm here, so it doesn't matter. So that depends on the person you have in that role. But I think once I've had to go to site after hours, I live about 25, 30 minutes away from the site. So it's very much a different experience of on-call. You're not dealing as much, because even if you're in an apartment complex that is in a partnership with the university, a lot of times the university is still providing the residents' life staff. Not always, but a lot of times they are. And in those situations, that's going back to the university and they're dealing with those emotional, mental health types of concerns more than we are. We're more about base building. Your toilet's clogged, you broke a window, like what are things that, and overnight for me, it's how do I put a Band-Aid on it until I can get it fixed till the next day.
Great, thank you. Teresa, what would you like to add?
I would say it completely depends on what your relationship is with the institution. Okay. So in my first position, I was part of an on-call rotation. There were 2 of us at the time, and we rotated. I think we did every other week or whatever. And even though we were responding to those crises, I found that the call volume was significantly less than it had been while I was on campus. And as you move up, you'll find that your call volume drops off pretty dramatically. Kind of like Kristen said, when I was in her role, the number of calls I got to come out or respond overnight were pretty limited. Like if my phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, like I woke up in a panic because I knew something major was happening, rather than where you're used to it ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning all the time. And so I think just know that piece of it, the relationship you have with the university and who's responsible for residents' life will impact what level of on-call responsibility looks like for you. Almost all of them have some sort of student component that's kind of handling the first level of stuff, the same way an RA would handle it. And then go kind of up from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So there was a good question that I want to talk about related to sales. So how much of your role is really in that sales aspect of it? And can you talk about like the level of comfort you have with that, any growth you had to obtain in this area, what that looks like? And Teresa, do you want to start us off?
Yep. Again, it's completely site specific. If you are functioning in that off-campus market, your sales skills need to be really, really on point. If you are on an on-campus situation, you get a little more leniency about what that like sales level needs to be. Almost all of them are going to require you to be able to do a tour. That's not dissimilar from a campus tour. So if you've ever had to do a campus tour, or if you've ever had your residence halls be open for a campus preview day and you have participated in the tour process, you get the basics of what it means to give a tour to a prospect. The differences are you're trying to sell them on why they want to go like live in your space. And so particularly if you're in the off-campus market, they have a lot more options. It's not like, oh, I've narrowed it down to these 5 schools and this is just a piece of it. They already are there, they know it, and they have 15 different options. And so your skill level needs to be a little bit higher. So if you are not naturally someone who likes to sell people on an experience or a place, then you'll find that you need to focus and work more on those tactics. I find that a lot of times when I'm hiring a leasing and marketing manager, I'm looking for someone, if they've had any sales experience. Have they done retail? Have they done, the campus experience? I'm looking for a ton. What have they done related to social media? Either building a personal brand, or whether they've worked in a housing office and they work on the marketing team. And so they're managing social media accounts. There's so much that's happening related to social media, even more so now with COVID-19, because we've gone to virtual leasing and online, everything has moved online. So if you've got any experience related to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, all of the like things that, I'll be honest, at my level, I need somebody else to be the expert. And so the site level staff, I'm looking to see like, what do they have and what have they done either in their personal or professional life that will help them in those skill sets. I tend to be someone in the hiring process that I look outside the box. I'm not just looking for folks who have been property, like they've been a leasing consultant, they've been a leasing agent, and they're looking for their next step. If you've got some kind of transferable skills related to sales, we can teach you how to sell an apartment. And so I'm looking for those transferable skills, particularly related to social media these days.
Great, thank you.
A lot of the same things. But I think, you know, what Teresa said, I think you can find that in anything. So admissions, you have experience with sales, event planning, you have a lot of marketing experience, student activities type things, housing, you have, like I did in my previous position, I did all our social media, I did all our communications. So I think that's what helped me get to this role. So I think there's definitely a lot you can transfer to those positions. I will be honest, leasing and marketing is probably not my favorite part of my job because I don't like being the face, but that's also why I have a leasing and marketing manager. So they're the ones who go out to the fair. So it's also just that comfort level, talking to people and drawing them in. And that's something that you're looking for is how you comfort people. There's a lot of really great resources out there if you want to learn how to do leasing. So our company offers us one, and so it'd be something you have to pay for, but it's called Leasing University. But if you start looking for things like that, about like, there's YouTube videos, like how to get the lead to turn, you know, and if you start taking some of those, that's now giving you the professional development to say, I already gone ahead because I really want to do this. And I've learned how to get a lead, how to get how to turn that lead into a signed lease, how to do those things. And I think, you know, seeing some of that ambition and go-getterness is really translates into those positions, because you do have to be creative and thinking outside the box. Like right now it's all right, who don't we normally reach out to that we can, because we need to expand our market from where we used to have it, and what are the things we're doing. So, you know, look at how Google Ads works. That's another site. Facebook ads, the social media piece is another part, but I think learning, you know, Facebook and Google both have online courses you can take for how to use their ads, and those are things you could do ahead of time that show that you're already putting that work in to make sure you're going to be successful in that role. Because those are also things I look for, are like, what are your experiences kind of being creative and getting new ideas out there. And so I think that's also one thing you'll find if you're someone who's been shot down a lot with your creative ideas. I don't think that will happen here, because we are always up for a new and fun idea. It just depends how much it costs. But, you know, if my staff come to me with a crazy idea, I'll be like, all right, well, let's, you know, think it out a little more, but let's see if we think that's something that's going to fly, if that's something that we think is going to get us results. Because that's really, for leasing and marketing, that's what it's about, is you're getting leases signed. And if you're doing something off the wall that's getting us leases signed, we're going to be on board.
And I'll echo that. My staff have often heard me say, I'll try anything once. Mm-hmm. If it works, great, and we'll keep doing it. If not, we'll go back to the drawing board and figure it out. So I think that's one of the fun parts about what we do, is that we have the flexibility to do that because we can execute things pretty quickly. So I think that's good. The other thing, like I said, I've mentioned LinkedIn a couple of times. There are several leasing kind of gurus that are on LinkedIn that put out YouTube videos. They put out webinars similar to this. Some of them have written books. So there's lots of things. If you're really interested in exploring the sales and marketing side, there are lots of resources out there to you that could be low cost, no cost to you. You just got to utilize those. And I will try to remember when we get off here to post links to some of that stuff that's on LinkedIn, so that you can kind of get a feel for and see kind of who those folks are in the industry, that you can start maybe following them on LinkedIn.
And Google, just like, I hear things and I'm like, oh no, I didn't know that was this. And I Google and I find stuff. And that's also find your local, there's definitely, wherever you live, there's some sort of real estate or property management. Either it's a meetup group or it's a, there's some sort of networking tool for you that you can go and start being involved in that. And if you're in a smaller town, even things like your Chamber of Commerce, like that's one thing I've had to get involved in, is the Chamber of Commerce in our community, because we need to have a voice in our community to make sure things are changing positively. So those are all things, but that's also ways for me to then make partnerships with people. So it's thinking differently about how you're going about selling yourself and networking and things like that.
That's awesome. This is such good information. And I am a huge fan of LinkedIn. And I think that regardless of what industry you're in, there's always a thought leader out there. And a lot of times they're selling their services, they have some sort of consultancy or something like that, but the amount of content they release for free is substantial. So go through all the free content first, and then you can decide if you want to make a further investment, but don't miss out on that. So another thumbs up for LinkedIn. So there's a question about the actual transition. And I think this is a really good question for a lot of our panels, but if you're at a pretty senior level now, can you move over to that either lateral or even step up position, or do you have to take a step down to grow within the private side? And Teresa, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are already, let's say you're already an associate director or you're already a director at a program, you can easily transition into a community manager, director level position. Some companies will absolutely consider you for a regional director level, but they may not. And part of that has to do with they've spent all this time growing and developing their community manager level staff. And so a lot of times to get to that regional director level, they've been grooming this whole group of folks to step up into those new positions. And so there is a possibility, depending on the size of the company and where they're at sort of in their kind of development process, that you may have to go into a community manager role and then transition, within a couple of years to being a regional. It just depends on have they maxed out all their talent or not. And so I think that sometimes can be tricky for folks, but I definitely think if you're already at an associate, sometimes an assistant director level or director level, you can easily transition into that community manager level, but sometimes it's hard getting into that kind of regional director role based on the fact that they've been grooming all this talent. I think it's an awesome thing about the privatized student housing world, property management world in general, is that they spend a lot of time investing in developing their teams. And so they want to see them move up. They want to see leasing agents move into sales and marketing roles. They want to see folks move into assistant community manager roles, and then community manager roles, and then up to regionals. And so they really want to invest in their groups. And because they have so many sites across the country, they're able to do that in a more aggressive timeline than you would typically find in higher ed. For example, I started as an assistant manager. Less than a year, I was a community manager. I spent a lot of time in the community manager role, but that has a lot to do with the role that I was in, the place that I was in personally. I could have transitioned into a regional position much sooner and chose to stay where I was until the timing just felt right for me. A lot of my friends who were community managers, they spend 3 to 5 years in that role, and then they're regionals either within their existing company or at another company. And so just know that the progression can happen pretty quickly, particularly in the lower levels. Like if you go in at a leasing and marketing role, you might transition pretty quickly to an assistant manager role or a community manager role pretty quickly. And just know there's a little stopgap that happens at that CM or that director of operations role before they transition up. But they spend a lot of time doing that. So it can be difficult to transition in without the networking and knowing where they are kind of in their talent pool.
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. I think one of the things that I've seen at our company, and I know that our company prides itself on, is raising from within. but they're not going to do that if they don't have the right people to raise from in, or they're not getting the interest in those positions. So every time we post a position, it's external and internal, especially director type positions, or community manager type positions. But we definitely have a lot of people coming into those positions. Myself, from the outside, I was an associate director before this, so it was a logical move for me to look for director positions. And I think the other nice part is, like, I don't want to go to a regional position and no one's pushing me. I feel like in higher ed, it's always that you need to take that 2 to 3 years, then you need to go to the next thing, and you can't be happy in those middle places. And I feel here, like, I joke with my boss constantly. I'm like, I hope you like me, because I'm planning to be here in this seat for 10 years. So let's keep it going. And there's no pressure for me. Like, they do give me opportunities to grow and to learn and to sit on committees and panels and things like that. But there's no pressure to be like, well, we're grooming you to do this next job, or you must want to do this next job. It's kind of like, okay, well, then let's make you the best you can be in your position. And that's actually going to, you know, be better for everybody if you stay longer, because there's more continuity. But I also think then it's my responsibility to get my staff to grow through the company too, and not just sit because they're comfortable in their chairs.
Mm-hmm.
So while you were talking, that made me think, Kristen, is I agree, there is in higher ed a lot of a continual need for growth and pushing, but I think that some of that is driven because of the unlivable salaries that we have at some levels. And so the growth happens because we realize that if we want to pay back all of our student loans, we're going to need to make more money. And so could you speak a little bit about how the salary and the benefits compare to higher ed?
Yeah. It is going to depend on your site, because each site has different, so there's this debt ratio thing where you have to be able to pay off the building, you know. And so you have to have a certain amount that you're making for different things. So I would say for the most part, you're going to see a pay increase of some sort, but not always. So you definitely need to look site to site. It obviously depends on what position you're at. But I do know my staff who've worked on campus and off campus, one of them said he took a pay cut to take the position, but it also included a free apartment. So for him, that was worth it to him. But other ones have said they've gotten significant pay increases. I would say for like an assistant director level, we're looking at about the $50,000 range-ish. I might be totally wrong in just speaking, but that's kind of where our department is at. But again, it's going to depend on your location, what the what the cost of living is. You're definitely going to get paid more in places where it costs more. You're going to get paid less in places where cost of living is less. But I definitely think that, so we get bonuses. Like, let me tell you, when I found out I got a bonus, I was like, what is that? What? I get a Christmas bonus? That's so exciting. And so we get bonuses, we get raises pretty regularly, like our annual raises. And they definitely do things to try and make you feel appreciated through the company. I have today off. They randomly announced that yesterday. The company decided we were having Juneteenth off. We got a mental health day for COVID, like, that we could take throughout a period of time. So I think they also do other things beyond just salary to make you feel appreciated. My health benefits are better than they were, but that's again going to depend on where you're coming from. I know some people who've said they're worse than where they came from, but I feel like we have a really good health plan. All my benefits pretty much are as good or better. Like, we have a tuition reimbursement program for staff. So that is something to take advantage of. We have regular trainings, meetings. It's a really supportive environment. Like, I never feel alone, even though I'm, you know, possibly far away from anyone else who is working for the company. So I like the transition. I like the perks, but it's hard to say what your salary changes will be, but they definitely want you to have a livable salary. So I think you're not going to see that you're getting paid quite the same ranges as you are for higher ed.
Thank you. Anything to add?
I would echo most of that. Again, Kristen brought up some great things, because I hire across the country. I can tell you there can be a huge difference between what we pay at sites, and it has everything to do with what's the size of the site, what's the cost of living in the area. all of how many staff are you supervising, all of those kinds of things. And so you may find that particularly if you're going in at a sales and marketing position, or you're going in an assistant community manager, you might take a little bit of a pay cut, but it's going to typically get made up because you're getting a bonus. Whether I highly encourage you, if you're looking at any of these positions, when you're talking with companies, when you get into the conversations about salary, ask them about their bonus structure and what that looks like, because they vary pretty significantly from company to company. Some folks are once a year, some folks are quarterly, some folks are monthly. It literally just depends on the company, your position, the whole 9 yards. So ask those questions and keep note of that because I think those things will matter. I will tell you, when I came in, and this was probably 16 years ago, so just full disclosure. When I came in at an assistant community manager level, I took a small pay cut, but within a year, my salary doubled. So when I went from an assistant director to community manager level, my salary doubled. When I went from community manager to regional, I got a significant pay increase. When I went from a regional to my current position, a significant pay increase. And I will tell you, like at that director level, you're making a lot of times similarly to what a director might be making, maybe not a director at a huge institution, but at an average size institution at that director, community manager level, you're going to be making similar to what a director of housing is making. The regionals are going to be making obviously more than that. And so you can imagine kind of what that does from a salary perspective, long-term.
And from a sanity perspective, you make that for one building or two buildings, for a much smaller, like I manage 568 residents. And so I think it's also looking at that perspective of your sanity is not being, like your mental health is going to be in a better place because you're not spreading yourself over 3,000 people or 10,000 people or however many you have in your housing or on your campus for whatever your role is. You're really focused on your community. Or if you're in sales and marketing, on the local community to get those people in. So it's really, I don't know, I just feel like I'm a lot happier because I don't have as many people to worry about.
That's great. That's great. And I want to get to this question about trends that you see happening due to the pandemic, because we started with that a little bit and I want to circle back, but I have one more question about the hiring and salary and negotiation process that came in privately. So are there any other big differences besides you've talked about how it moves so much faster, which has been a trend across all panels. Everything is moving faster than higher ed, not surprisingly. Are there any other things that people need to be aware of that are different than the hiring process for higher ed?
I would say you may not be asked to give a presentation. I know because I've been in some higher ed search processes. You're usually asked to give a presentation. You've got to meet with 15,000 people. You have a full day of interviews. And I will tell you that that's not usually what it looks like. You might have a phone interview or a video interview. You may do a second round of that. And then depending in COVID, you may not go on site. You might, depending on what's going on and what level of the position you're at. But I didn't spend all day in interviews. I met with the student staff. I met with the manager or the person I was going to be reporting to, and the decision was made within 3 days. So just know, like, typical expectations about the hiring process. You may have to pay for your travel if you're traveling to the site. You may not have to. It depends on the company. So ask that question. If they are asking you to come to the site and you're not local, ask what that looks like.
Is there any room for, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Is there any room for negotiations, be it salary or benefits or like time off? Yes.
Yes. Ask. You'll get told no, obviously, if you don't ask. So ask the questions. I have found that in all of my positions, I allow for some negotiation and salary. Some companies will allow for negotiation and time off. And some will allow some negotiation and like other benefits, whether that's, tuition reimbursement or maybe they normally, when you start with a company, you get 2 weeks, so you negotiate an extra week or something like that. But know kind of what your wish list items are. And the only way you'll know is if you ask. And you'll be surprised. A lot of times you'll find that they're willing to at least meet you in the middle.
Right. I was going to echo, ask for more than you want. So when I went into this position, I was happy with the salary they offered me, but I was not happy with the vacation time I was getting. And so I really just wanted more vacation time. And I figured they'd say no to more salary. So I asked for both, and they ended up giving me both. So you don't know what you're going to get till you ask, but if you ask for a little more, you hopefully will at least get those wish list items. And obviously you're not wanting to go crazy on your asks. Like if they're offering you $40,000, you're not like, well, I want 60. That's probably not going to happen, but you know, a few $1,000s here or there. Or look at what other market, you know, if you can track down what the typical cost is, and you can kind of give the reasoning behind why you're looking for that. But I have a coworker who told me she never takes a job without saying she has a vacation planned, because then she knows she's going to get that week off built in. So it's not a bad plan if you're uncomfortable just flat out saying you want extra days. So that was something that I think is important. And then I think with the hiring process, like as much as it is important that you, like for me to make an impression on the regional, I see my regional maybe 3 or 4 times a year. My building staff were the ones who got to make that decision. They were the ones whose opinions mattered. So don't go into it thinking you have to only impress this one person because they're making the decision. They really do take into account what the staff wants. After I was hired, I was told that they were getting pushed towards a different person, but that was not who they want, and they made their thoughts known, and that's what ended up happening. So I think unlike an on-campus where maybe it is the vice president or the director at the end of the day, or the person who's supervising at the end of the day gets to say what they want, even if everyone else disagrees, because I've been in those situations on campus, you see a little more of that, okay, these are the people working with you every day. They're the ones who need to be happy with this person and be happy with this hire.
That's great. That's really good advice, I think, that people need to know. So let's, we have just a few more minutes, and, you know, feel free if you have other questions, I'll try to get to them, but I want to talk about what COVID-19 is meaning for your areas. So are there hiring freezes? Are there more positions? What's happening with that? And Kristen, we'll go ahead and let you kick off.
That depends on where you're located. So we have places that, because they're tied to the university and the university shut down and everybody had to go home, we have had to do layoffs in those situations. Usually, you know, it's either a furlough or a layoff until we can reopen, just because budgetarily, that's the only option you have. Up to, there are positions still being posted. We just had an announcement this week that a director was leaving from a position in Florida. So that's open. Go on to COCM.com. There's a job there. So there's stuff that's definitely still moving around. So it's, COVID-19 has been interesting, and how we've reacted. So some universities that we partner with, because they have traditional residence halls, even though they closed the university, they said, you know, if you have nowhere else to go, you can stay on campus. Well, since we're set up with the 1 bedroom, 1 bath, or private bedrooms with the 1 bath that's shared among just a couple rooms, they moved all their students over to us. So a lot of our buildings have still been operating at some capacity. My building, because we're off campus, is at 75% capacity. Yes, I saw a flood of cancellations come in, which was not good, but I still have the majority of people in my building, which is better for everyone. And so I think what it's really meant for me is changing my day-to-day operations in my world of, you know, we've had to change some services we provide. We've had to change how we're offering services. We have to really communicate with our residents to make sure we're knowing that they're there. How can we help them? Making sure our internet speed is good, those types of things. So in my world, it's more about how are we making sure they're still having a really positive experience so that they want to stay in our community. Whereas some of my on-campus housing partners are more having the experience of, okay, we've had to shut down our building entirely. And what does that mean when your building's been closed? Like, what are things you have to do to make sure that your building doesn't actually have pipes backing up and sewage issues and things like that? So it's been interesting. But one thing I will say is every Friday since this all started, we've had an all directors meeting and talked about, and all maintenance, and talked about all these things and said, here's the things you think about. So we were never alone in trying to come through these things. And at one point they were only talking about closed buildings, and there were a few of us that were like, we're still open. And they were like, oh yeah. And so then they started like doing some separate things to remind us and things we should be doing and how to do outreach. So it's different. But I think if anything, it's really helped us all learn how to pivot and how to do some things differently and possibly better. Like virtual tours, I don't think were a thing with P3s that much. We all have virtual tours now. We're all offering them. We're all learning more about our leasing processes and how we can make those user-friendly for people who may not be located right where we are. So if anything, I think for the positive side we can take away from it is we've learned a lot and we've changed a lot, and some of those things will definitely be staying well beyond COVID times.
Mm-hmm. I will tell you, I've got quite a few friends who are in the off-campus world, even though I typically tend to be in the on-campus world. None of my sites have shut down. Even those that are on campus have not shut down completely. They are like 33% occupied currently, but they haven't totally shut down. So we've kept all the staff. I've been lucky that we're one of the companies we haven't had to do any layoffs or furloughs. Across the industry, I do a weekly call with all of the student housing industry providers. And most of them, if you're looking for an on-site position, those positions are still out there, readily available, and they are recruiting for them. So community managers, assistant community managers, sales and marketing team, accounting team, they are actively looking for those positions. And so when you see those posted on Indeed or a company website, know that they are actively recruiting for those positions. The positions that have been impacted the most are some of those road warrior type positions, because everyone's very unsure about getting on the road, about getting in a plane, going to travel to sites and things like that. And so we're starting to see that open up a little bit, but that's kind of the level of where the hiring freezes have happened, is sort of that road warrior type position. So if you're looking for something on site, those positions are open and readily available.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think we've gotten to all of the questions that I've seen come through the chat. So thank you both so much for being here and for sharing your expertise. This was so helpful and really eye-opening for me, since I don't have any background in this. Is there anything that either of you would like to share before we wrap up? Anything that you think attendees need to know about your areas?
I would say we hear a lot of times in higher ed about sort of the dark side. Like, I remember particularly when I first transitioned, again, 15 years ago, oh, you're going to work for the dark side. And you don't hear it as much, but you still will hear it, particularly from older professionals. So I would say keep an open mind. Always be networking and talking to folks. Establish relationships, even if you don't think you're ever going to want to go to the other side or see what that's like, and you know that you're always going to have a career in higher ed, because you never know when those relationships are going to matter. I'm super active in a COCM, and I have a ton of relationships, personal and professional, with folks who have stayed completely on the higher ed side, but we developed those relationships while I was in fully. And so now when I see something come across for a campus, I know people. So I can make a phone call and say, hey, I saw this opportunity. I saw you guys are looking for housing, and you have all of those connections available. And so I think definitely network and keep those relationships. Don't burn the bridges if you can avoid it.
Awesome. Thanks, Teresa. Kristen.
I think it's important to say, given all the things going on currently in the world, I think a lot of times people think if they're leaving higher ed, they're also leaving some of that social justice and things like that behind. I have been very proud to work for this company over the past few months. We have had missteps, but they're owning their missteps, and they're really working hard to change the culture. We are a very diverse place to work. It's something they're very proud of. And it's a place where I've been on, we've been doing a lot of phone calls, and similar to like what a COCM has been doing, if you're part of the housing, and I'm sure other places have, to have allyship calls and calls for people of color. We've been doing those internal to our company to make sure staff feel supported. And people are voicing concerns. People are voicing, we're a company who our home office is in Alabama. There's a lot of people with concerns out there. And they're open to that, and they're hearing it, and they're making changes, and short-term and hopefully long-term. And so I think don't feel like you have to leave that part of you behind. There's going to be companies out there that support that and that still want that and that still value those same things. So don't necessarily stay in a place because you think you're not going to be able to have those opportunities if you move someplace else. I think that's also one of the things, again, that I really like about being in a foot in off-campus housing and in on-campus housing, because of having both those worlds in my current role, is I still get a lot of that touch-feely stuff that I would have gotten on campus, but I also, I work a more 9 to 5. I have a much more sane life. I'm calmer about things. So it is not the darker side. That's all. Because I feel this, like when I took this job, it was like, oh, you're going to private housing. I was like, it's really not that big of a deal. So.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And once again, thank you. Thank you for everyone who joined. I will post the recording as well as the chat transcript for folks to see after. We have one more panel later today. It's at 4:30 on the East Coast or 1:30 on the West Coast, and we're going to be talking about K-12 education. So, and then that's it for this week, but we've got, I don't know, like 8 more next week. So this is awesome. Teresa, Kristen, thank you so much. And everyone have a wonderful day and go and find a meaningful way to honor Juneteenth today. Take care.
Bye, everybody.